Learning Objective 4 tells us about intangible assets. Now, these are becoming extremely important. All right, it's very important to understand that a lot of businesses base their entire business around intangible assets. That's very true for very inventive companies like Apple. Over the years, they've had a number of different patents because they've invented things like that started very small with an iPod and grew to all these things that they have today. Um, Drug companies, we're in the midst of a lot of drug companies making things. They're going to be getting a patent that proves that they own it. Thus, they're the only ones who can sell it, right? And that's really one of the important things about an intangible asset is it does prove ownership of something, which gives you the exclusive right to sell it. Okay. Um, a patent is about having an invention that you own. You apply for a patent. There's costs involved for that. You have to prove that you invented it, and before you can claim ownership. So there's a lot of patents out there. Copyrights are equally important. A copyright is for written things, artistic work, music, um, lots of different types of issues that are copywritten. Broadcasting are all copyrights. Characters, so you have whether it's a Nickelodeon character or a Disney character, guess what? They're owned by the company through a copyright. So copyrights are extremely powerful proof. Again, that is something you have to apply for. It, like a patent, it is government recognition that you own it. And that is the legal basis for you to protect your property. And thus, if someone tries to steal your property, you can sue. And no one can use any property without your permission, which usually comes in the form of money. And so these are incredibly important. Okay. So that's why they say intangible assets are rights, privileges, competitive advantages that really are about ownership of these types of assets. But a patent is a piece of paper, in essence. A copyright's a piece of paper. So they don't really have any physical substance other than it's a legal document. But they certainly mean a lot. They certainly mean a lot. Businesses can have franchises, which are contractual agreements or licenses that are part of their ownership. We will look at trademarks and trade names. And we're going to be introduced to talk a little bit more about a concept called goodwill. Now, just like anything else, when a company, and I'll go back to a patent. So let's say Apple develops right now, they have the iPhone 12 or something right now. So they spent money on a patent and the updated inventions, etc. How long is that patent going to be used for? Well, in some instances, the patent's going to have a very limited life, right? Because there's going to be something new that comes along that's going to take away the market share, and thus they have to do new products or other types of things. However, there are some intangible assets that may have somewhat of an indefinite life. It might last quite a long time. So, I mean, music and lyrics and books and so forth. I mean, these things can be an indefinite life. FICO, Fair Isaac Company, has an algorithm, a mathematical formula that they own. It's their copywritten invention, and it's their entire business is based on that. Google is also based on a bunch of code. It's a search engine that started off. It's gotten a lot bigger than that, of course, but it just started off quite simple, and it's grown from there. So sometimes intangible assets have a much longer life, maybe an even indefinite life. I mean, how old is Mickey Mouse? Uh, it's coming on. I don't know. I think Mickey Mouse is like 80 years old. Of course, he doesn't look like he's aged at all, but he's quite an old character. Same with Winnie the Pooh. Winnie the Pooh is at least 50, 60 years old. So, but these have literally indefinite lives. These characters can live on forever. So, in essence, that intangible asset can live on forever. Um, that's a basis of it. Intangible assets sometimes have a limited life, and very much like property, plant, and equipment accounts that have limited life, they're subject to a process of allocating the cost. For property, plant, and equipment, that is depreciation. For intangible assets, that's amortization. Okay, so they will have an amortization expense for the assets that have a limited life. That doesn't apply for intangible assets that have an indefinite life. Okay, so Disney could never really kind of write off Mickey Mouse. So it's just something that can't happen. And so intangible assets also fall into these types of categories, and they're subject to something called amortization, not depreciation. So a patent, as you see here, is an exclusive right. Okay, an exclusive right, exclusive ownership to manufacture, sell, and control an invention for a period of 20 years. Okay, now this really affects. We're living in pandemic times, right? So this really affects pharmaceutical companies. When they actually get a patent for their medicines or vaccines or whatnot, that patent gives them the exclusive right to that particular drug for 20 years. Um, these types of patents cannot be renewed. Some patents can be renewed for a longer period of time, but for pharmaceutical companies, it's a 20-year patent, and that's it. After the 20 years is expired, then that's where we get the category that we call generic drugs. A generic drug is basically the patent has expired on the drug, and so anybody can make it, which is why anybody can make aspirin or Tylenol. They can't call it Tylenol, but they can certainly make it, right? Acetaminophen. So same with they can't call it. Uh, oh my God, I'm blanking out on ibuprofen. They can't call it Advil, but they certainly can make ibuprofen. And so why? Because the patent's been expired. Some patents can be renewed, and it makes sense for some patents to be renewed. But why would Apple want to renew a patent for the iPod? No one uses an iPod anymore. We have it on our phones. We have music on our phone. It doesn't make any sense to renew certain patents. In some cases, you can renew a patent. Patents cost money, and so all the money that you have spent basically to create that patent, including the legal fees, are going to be debited to the patent account. What's not part of the patent account is research and development costs. They're going to be expensed as they go. So patents are very powerful because they actually really kind of affect us in so many ways. And if you ever watch Shark Tank, that's one of the things when they have an inventor of something there, it's one of the first questions that comes out of the sharks. Do you have a patent? Do you own it? Because that's in some cases the most valuable part of the idea that's being presented to them. So here's an illustration on how a patent sort of works out with amortization. So they have this company, National Labs. They have a patent that costs $60,000. Okay. They think this patent's going to have a useful life of 8 years. And so it's going to be subject to amortization. So what's going to be the amortization, right, for the year? Now, in this case, this particular company didn't get the patent until June the 30th, and they're closing their books on December 31st. So the cost of the patent is 60,000 divided by 8 years. So the annual amortization expense will be $7,500, just like we did straight line depreciation. It's very simple. However, because this year they didn't start it until June 30th, and so they've only had it for 6 months, they could only expense 6 months of it. And so you're going to have an amortization expense for $3,750 and accumulated amortization for this patent of $3,750 at the end of their year. Okay. So again, research and development costs are basically expensed and as they're incurred, and lots of research and development goes into creating all types of things. And so so these are not intangible assets, but they're just costed out to create the intangible assets. Copyrights are very, very important because it does give the owner an exclusive right to reproduce something such as a published work or an artistic piece of work. How long does a copyright last? It lasts for the entire life of the creator plus 70 years after they're dead. So that means people like Michael Jackson is still making money. Prince is still making money. Because these folks passed away, but they still own the music. Now, of course, they're not here, so who owns it? Their estate owns it. Their legal estate owns it, but they still own it. They still own it. They're still making money from it. So it takes money to apply for a copyright, and so basically all those costs are capitalized. Some copyrights are defended in court, and so let me just get a song out that you probably know about, but the copyright was violated. So you probably heard this song before. It's an older one. But that beat in the background and the woo, in the background, was copywritten. And unfortunately for Robin Thicke and company, they used that in their song, but it was already copywritten from a group in the 70s. And so that group in the 70s had to go and defend the copyright in court. They brought it to court. They were able to prove ownership, that was their music, and that they did not grant any rights for Robin Thicke and Company to use it. And thus they were able to collect money from that because Robin Thicke made a pretty good amount of money on this song. And if it weren't for this beat, it probably wouldn't have been half as good. So that group was able to use the copyright, that proof of ownership, to grab and sue and grab the rest of that money that was made. Copyrights, some copyrights are probably not going to be worth having for the full life. So you can amortize a copyright over a useful life. So you have authors that create books. You have a Stephen King or J.K. Rowling. She's creating all these books. Well, not that many people are going to want to read a much older book if there's something newer that's more updated, exciting. So you can literally amortize a copyright over what is considered a useful life, if there is a useful life um, to it. Um, so, again, this is all decided up front when this is kind of all done. Trademarks, trade names are extremely important. They're also intangible assets. They're owned by the company. So, so whether there's a particular word or a phrase or a jingle or a symbol that is owned by a company, that is legally protected. Excuse me, for 20-year periods that are renewable. Okay. And because it's renewable and can last a long time, these cannot be amortized. Okay. And so there's a lot. I mean, as a matter of fact, even if you look at, if you probably watched the Super Bowl a few weeks back, Dave made it very clear. This is well, not only is it a copywritten broadcast of the NFL, but if you look at the NFL symbol, you'll see a little trademark and a trade name. They own that. They own all those things. They own, it's very interesting. It's very fascinating when you think about it. Not only that, speaking of the NFL and others, they own all the teams. So the NFL, it might sound like someone owns the Jets or the Giants or the Patriots or the Bears or the Cowboys. They do have their owner, but it's actually the actual franchise is granted. The NFL actually owns all those teams. And they approve the owners of the franchises. So every one of those teams are franchises of the NFL. There can't be a new franchise without the NFL doing it. I can't say, "Hey, I want to start a team in Poughkeepsie." That's nice. It's just not going to happen. Not being part of that particular league because they own all those things. Franchises are contractual agreements by a franchisor and a franchisee. Okay. Um, Now, what you and I are used to dealing with is we might go to a dealer to buy a car. We certainly might stop by the gas station. We might stop in and grab a bite to eat, or we might stay at a hotel. Believe it or not, most of those are franchises. Um, so it's a contractual agreement that the person who is running that particular business, whether it's a Toyota dealer, a Shell station, a Subway restaurant, or a Marriott hotel, but they have entered into a contractual agreement in order to run that hotel or run that Subway. They have to do things exactly by that contract. And this is one of the reasons why the franchise in Golden Corral and Poughkeepsie failed, is because the person who owned the franchise, who bought the franchise rights, wasn't following the contract. And the franchisor basically said, "Well, this is not yours. This is ours." And they backed out of the contract, which is their right to do because they own it. If you're not following the contract, you're not going to be an owner of a franchise. Okay. And so, because basically it's a breach of contract, and that's relatively easy to prove in court because the contract agreements are huge. And so, these franchises do have a limited life to some degree because I think after you own a McDonald's franchise for, I don't know, 20 plus years, then you don't have to pay certain fees to the mothership, to McDonald's corporate. So there are some benefits in the long run, but in the meantime, you have to do things their way. So goodwill is a situation where, when, say, one company buys another company, the only thing that we see financially are the value of the assets that the company is purchasing. We don't see on the balance sheet the exceptional management, the wonderful and skilled employees that company has that we're buying. Um, we don't see the reputation. The reputation is not on the balance sheet, right? That we're buying, but we know it has a good reputation. It might have very high quality products that we value. So we might basically overpay. We might overpay in the eyes of accounting for the assets. So anything that we overpay above the value of the assets is goodwill. So, for example, Disney purchased Marvel um, several years back, and they paid an incredibly high price for Marvel, much higher than what the assets were worth on their balance sheet. So all the excess amount that they spent to purchase Marvel will be shown as goodwill, an intangible asset on Disney's balance sheet. They did the same thing when they bought Lucasfilms. They bought the Star Wars collection. Disney owns that too. Again, the assets had one value. They paid much more than that. That's going to be goodwill. Okay. So that's basically intangible assets, sort of in a nutshell. It's basically definitions that you have to sort of know here. So really not that bad in general. We'll take a quick break, come back to our group, and see if there's any questions there.